Like I said at the end of last episode, I believe with all of my being that it is inevitable that this story breaks. Let me explain why I say that. The way I see it, one of two things will happen in the near future. Either one, an effective drug treatment or cure or diagnostic test for ME will become available, or a breakthrough in research will find out what causes it, or two, the scandal will end up breaking by itself before that happens. With that first scenario, a treatment or cure or diagnostic test or breakthrough will finally prove to the world once and for all that ME is indisputably a real biological illness. Once we have that, everyone will be forced to admit that ME is a real biological disease, and that would force us to confront the horrific abuse of the past and sadly present. And in a post pandemic world, it's only a matter of time before a treatment becomes available. Clinical trials are taking place all over the world testing treatments for long COVID, and I have a sneaking suspicion that whatever they find that works for the roughly 50% of long COVID patients with an ME like illness, it will also work for those of us that developed ME before the pandemic. Plus, there are a lot of very exciting studies going on for ME too, such as the Decode ME study, the world's biggest genetic study of ME. There's also another UK-based ME study going on at the moment, in which researchers are looking at the electrical activity of ME patients' cells compared to healthy controls. That study may well even result in a diagnostic test for ME, finally. Plus, we have future OMF studies to look forward to. We just need one effective drug treatment or one breakthrough to prove our point. Just one, and the false idea that ME is psychological will have to be put to bed forever. Then the world will be forced to look back at the past and realize just how wrongly we patients have been treated for all of these years. And like I said with scenario two, the scandal might just break before that. In fact, there is something we can all do to make that happen sooner. I'm going to tell you what that thing is in our final episode, but for now, there are still a few more things I must say. If you take anything with you from watching these videos, please, please take the message of what I am about to tell you. If you're watching this and you or your children have ME or another post-viral illness or long COVID of any kind, and if you don't understand why your life has been torn apart and why no one seems to care, then everything I have spoken about in these videos is, in my opinion, the reason why. This stupid, ugly history of ignorance, discrimination, and iniquity is why you have been left alone to suffer. And the horrible truth at the core of this scandal is that we had so much time in which we could have changed this outcome. Emmy was first given a name 70 years before the start of the pandemic. The money was there, the interest was there, and yet people fucked it up. They fucked it up so badly that we ended up with a global medical catastrophe that we now find ourselves in. It's so infuriating, it's maddening, it's heartbreaking, it's grossly unjust, it's so deeply wrong, but above all, above everything else, it is not your fault. Learning about all this information I've shared with you through my research into ME has been a profoundly healing experience for me because it made me realize that I am not the center of my disease narrative. I'll try to explain. When you get ME or when you get any complex chronic illness for which there is little awareness and little to no treatment available for it, it often hits you completely out of nowhere. I had never even heard of ME before I got it myself, and I was really healthy at the time too. I was an athlete. And then overnight, I went from that to being hardly able to climb a flight of stairs. And so, for many of us, we get this disease that we've never previously heard of. We get a diagnosis if we're lucky. We're very often told either indirectly or directly that it's somehow our fault that we have it, and then we end up just completely left alone and abandoned to deal with it. We watch our lives disintegrate around us, and the only constant in all of it is ourselves and our bodies. Our day one of being sick becomes the day one of our disease narrative timelines, and then because we are cut off from all the information, every awful thing that happens after that just ends up feeling like it's our fault or our failure, like we somehow did something to deserve it. But this is not true. When you consider the information we now have at hand, we know that this didn't start with us becoming sick. It started thousands of years ago with the history of hysteria, and then it took decades of misogyny and racism and ableism and chronic underfunding and people in positions of power fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of our illness to bring us to this point. Even when it comes to your body, things didn't start when you got sick. They may have well started when a sperm cell met an egg cell and the DNA combined and left you unfortunately genetically predisposed to this illness. And that was no one's fault. So you see, you aren't the center of your disease narrative, and neither am I the center of mine. Our illnesses, as horrific and life-shattering as they are only a small part of this overarching narrative. It was never anything you did or didn't do that led to your suffering at the hands of your disease. It was everything else in the timeline that we should be focusing on to make sense of our suffering. I hope that me explaining that has helped you somewhat. Even if it hasn't, I would really like it if you could use the information I've shared with you over the course of these videos to find some way to liberate yourself from self-blame. Because there are so many things that you are well within your rights to be angry at for playing a part in this medical scandal, but please don't ever make yourself one of them. This was never, ever your fault. You have not failed anyone. You haven't failed your friends or your family or your colleagues, and you certainly haven't failed yourself. You have been failed, and I am so, so sorry about that. Even if no one else will say it, I will. I am so, so sorry that you have been left alone to suffer like this. You definitely did not deserve it. Speaking as an ME patient, I will say that our collective suffering has been profound and prolonged, and unfortunately needless because so much of it was preventable. But just because it was needless, it does not make it pointless. It is up to us to prescribe meaning to our suffering if we want to, and I have decided that my suffering means something because it will prevent suffering of others in the future. See, I think that it is highly unlikely that we ME or long COVID patients will be given any financial compensation for our suffering due to this scandal, and that is purely because there are so many of us and we have all been hurt so badly for so long that there isn't a single country in the world with enough money to pay us what we would be owed. But that just means that what we won't be paid in money, we must be paid in change. And I don't mean change as in coins, I mean change as in action. Optimist that I am, I believe that the world will be rightfully outraged to learn the truth about this scandal, and when everything has been brought to light, I am certain that there will be hell to pay. This scandal will explode like a supernova, and when it does, the world's eyes will be on us, and all of our pain that has been ignored up until now will finally be exposed for everyone to see. And in our moment of vindication, we will finally be given recognition and a voice, and we will be able to demand that the wrongs of the past and present are righted through change. We get to decide what change we want to see. We can demand an apology from those who have wrongfully claimed that ME is psychological or psychosomatic in the past. We can demand an apology from the UK government and the NIH, and with those apologies, our healing can finally begin. We can demand that no woman and no person of colour will ever be ignored by medicine again. We get to decide that everyone's suffering matters. We can demand that no disease be overlooked by medicine ever again. And our lofty demands will have to be met because our suffering has been so profound. A brighter future for us all is just around the corner, and all it will take is this story breaking. All that needs to happen is for the world to recognize ME. And we don't just have to wait for it, we can make that happen. And I will reveal how we can do that in our final episode.